Hey everybody, it's me, Scott from Heroic Studios Gaming. You're on my Patreon, so you know who I am. I don't know why I was introduced like that. It's not like these videos are up on YouTube or anything where everyone else can see them. Like, it's for you, so you guys know who I am. Anyway, how's it going? How's it going? This is another video in the month of July where we're covering Warhammer 40k and the universe thereof. Today we're actually going to be covering the Eisenhorn series, or really the four books that are sort of the four book series that are kind of interlinked together. It's like three. Anyway, four book series that are interlinked together with the term Eisenhorn. But I also wanted to cover some of the Warhammer 40k history and like the Black Library, so that you guys, in case you are unaware, if you are uninitiated to Warhammer 40k, which I mean, I assume you're not, but maybe you are, or maybe future patrons that come in here are like unfamiliar, that you guys have at least an idea of what the heck I'm even talking about when I say Warhammer 40k or Warhammer 40,000. So let's dive right in. This is going to be a little bit of a longer video. I actually made this video once before, but then I realized that, well, it was just a little long and I wanted to streamline it a little bit better. This is me streamlining, so that gives you guys an idea what the other one was like. So let's start off. So Warhammer 40k or Warhammer 40,000, it's written out like that. It's usually considered by people who play it or know about it Warhammer 40k. Instead of saying 40,000, it's like a lot harder to say. It started as a miniature game that was based on another miniature game called Warhammer, hence the Warhammer 40k thing. The Warhammer miniature game was made in 1983, and it was a fantasy game where they essentially started with just trying to make D&D figures, like third-party D&D figures, and TSR was not cool with that, so like they had to sort of rename it something else. And so instead of calling it Dungeons & Dragons figures, they called it its own fantasy game called Warhammer. But the company that produced it was called Games Workshop. And they also published a magazine called White Dwarf where they talked about the games that they were creating, and it's sort of how they published the rules for anything that they created. So Games Workshop was making these miniatures for Dungeons & Dragons, you know, this fantasy miniatures, and they decided to call their own game Warhammer. And then in 1987, they released Warhammer 40,000. But Warhammer 40,000 was originally developed under the name Rogue Trader. It was created by some of the creators who had one of the four creators, I think, who made the Warhammer miniature game, and he was trying to make a spaceship combat game. So we called it Rogue Trader, and it was and it was like this spaceship combat. It was actually slated for release in 1987 under that name, Rogue Trader. But they changed the name because Games Workshop made a deal with the 2000 AD guys, the same guys that make Judge Dredd, to make a board game for their wildly popular Rogue Trooper comic book series. So because it was going to be called Rogue Trooper board game, and this would be Rogue Trader, the company was really afraid that customers might not understand the difference and confuse the two. So they went ahead and changed its name from Rogue Trader to Warhammer 40,000, using that old Warhammer thing. And so it sort of became its own thing. So, and it linked it to the Warhammer universe, which then later, like the lore kind of linked the two together. They created like lore that put the two together. And the Rogue Trader terminology sort of appeared later, being encapsulated in the Warhammer 40k universe. So that was originally what it was called, and that's what happened. It was launched in 1987. It was, you know, the rules were featured in that White Dwarf magazine that the Games Workshop company produced. But it was wildly popular as soon as it came out. It became so popular, in fact, that it was featured in Dragons magazine, which was primarily focused on Dungeons & Dragons, in 1988. And it has been the flagship product that has kept the company Games Workshop afloat since then. So despite all of the ins and outs and fluctuations of the market and like financial decisions on the part of Games Workshop, Warhammer 40k's miniature pieces, the paint, everything that goes along with it, has kept the company alive. So that's why it's important to know about this thing. But along in 1987 when it came out, they had released, you know, the rules in the White Dwarf magazine, but they also continued to write like little short stories, little lore building things in the magazine from that point forward. That eventually developed into its whole different thing that was eventually called the Black Library. And it's made up of all of the different short stories and novels that have been written in the Warhammer 40k universe. There's at least 200 full novels in the Black Library right now. There's probably more. There's a lot of short stories as well. But as far as full novels go, there's 200. And so that's sort of what we're talking about. For the most part, the Warhammer 40k universe, like, timeline stayed the same. So a lot of these stories kind of featured, they were like people featured. and the ones we're going to talk about today are even people featured, and not so much like timeline featured or like plot line features. I mean, there are plot line features within them, but they're more like stories of the people in the Warhammer 40k universe, because the company wanted to keep the universe the same, and like they made small minor changes here and there when they released new sort of products into the market, but for the most part it just stayed the same, and these things were just kind of things that appeared in different parts of the universe. But then in 2017 they made a giant leap forward by introducing a whole bunch of new psyker powers, and they decided that the universe plotline was going to change, so they split the universe in half thanks to this galactic event, as it were, like this rift in space sort of opens up, and it unleashes new chaos into the universe, as well as bringing back some old Primarchs from the Space Marines to sort of revamp the story. So in 2017 they decided to do a plotline change, as it's been referred to, and they reintroduced a whole bunch of new characters, or they introduced new characters and they reintroduced old characters, and the novels in the Black Library have reflected that since 2017. But the Warhammer 40k universe has spawned 20 video games, 20 board games or card games, 6 tabletop RPGs, 1 animated film, which I've seen, and there's a TV show in development based on the Eisenhorn book series, which is what I wanted to talk to you about today. So that's 6 minutes of like the basic rundown of the history of like the Warhammer 40k game, not the in-universe history. That takes forever, and I know this because I ran into that. And yeah, I'll probably talk about it when I talk about the RPG stuff and how I got introduced to the RPG universe. But my first introduction to Warhammer 40k actually came in the form of a book. The story is that in 2000, I was, well, I guess it was, it was 2000. In the year 2000, my family moved out here to Oregon because my dad got a job at Intel. In the process of moving, we ended up sort of packing everything up, like Intel's dime, just sort of packaged everything in boxes and took it. And then we ended up coming out like via plane a couple days later, and then we were staying in like corporate housing until the stuff got there, and then we found an apartment to live in, or a place to live in. We bought we rented a townhome. We moved into that. In that process, I had nothing, 0 things, which for somebody like me who's a bibliophile, that's bad, right? I had no books. The audiobooks were like a thing if you had like a tape player, and I wasn't going to lug around a whole bunch of tapes, right, back then. CDs were a thing, so I could have got CD versions, but I still have to lug around a bunch of CDs, and that wasn't happening. We were moving. I basically had a backpack that had like 3 days worth of clothes. So I think we were at the airport. I'm pretty sure that's where we bought it. We were at the airport, and I was bored, and I wandered into one of the bookstores there, and there was like, the normal airport books you see, but then there was like this one book on the shelf that was like the science fiction area. There was like a couple of science fiction books. There's one book that had like this really cool cover art, and it was like a dude in a metal suit throwing a grenade into like a tank. Is what it looked like, and it said Space Wolves, right, like across it. And I didn't understand what the like Warhammer 40k logo was on the top. I had no idea what the hell that was, but I didn't care. I just figured it was like, the book was like Forgotten Realms or something, just some sort of series. And I like checked and double checked and made sure that this was the first in a sequence, so that I wasn't reading like a third book or something. And it was. It said so. And so I was like, great, cool, I'll read this one. That wasn't Eisenhorn. That was Space Wolves. But the point that I'm getting at is that it was the Black Library that actually got me first introduced to the Warhammer 40k universe, and I had no clue what the hell was going on in that story, and that story was definitely one that you needed to know some stuff about the universe. So I was just kind of like, this is weird, and put it aside for a while. And the next book that I ever read in the Black Library about the Warhammer 40k universe was actually Eisenhorn Book 1, Xenos. So I'm actually going to talk to you about the second book I ever in the Warhammer 40k universe that I ever read. But it was the one that actually like meant something to me, where I was actually trying to learn the Warhammer 40k universe and like knew that was a thing that I was looking into. So we'll talk about that. So let's talk about that now. So Eisenhorn is a series of books. It's actually 3 books in a series, the Eisenhorn Saga, right? Written by Dan Abnett. It's part of a larger sequence that has 4 parts to it. There's Eisenhorn, which follows Gregory Eisenhorn, an Inquisitor for the Imperium, the titular character, who's part of a group called he's Ordo Xenos, right? So he's a group of Inquisitors who look into Xenos stuff and the influence of aliens and alien tech. And how that influences humans, and like get rid of blasphemous things that make people think about stuff that isn't related to the God Emperor. Meanwhile, the next book in the next sequence, it's like a series in that same group, is Ravenor, following Gideon Ravenor, who is a protege and one of the characters in the original Eisenhorn series. He's a protege of Gregory Eisenhorn. He's also an Inquisitor, but he's also the world's or the universe's most powerful psyker. I think he's also mute, if I remember the character correctly. But he can use his brain to do crazy things. And then the third sequence of stories is called Beckwin. They follow the character Elizabeth Beckwin. That was her name, Elizabeth Beckwin, who is one of Eisenhorn's closest companions in the Eisenhorn series. She is a blank. She is a psychic null point. She's an anti-psyker, as it were, and she was found and trained by Eisenhorn, and he used her to great advantage during the original series. And then the final one is called Magos, which is actually just a bunch of short stories, but 12 of the short stories in the Magos series include or Magos, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but anyway, 12 of them follow Gregory Eisenhorn in his earlier days when he was just an Inquisitor and not like the story arc that we see later. They're called like the case files of Gregory Eisenhorn or something like that. So that's the Eisenhorn group as a whole, but the original Eisenhorn series, the trilogy, is what I want to talk about. They are named Xenos. Oh shoot, what are they named? Xenos, Malleus, and Hereticus, I think, is actually what they're called. I don't know. Well, anyway, I read all three of them. I don't have them up to you. That I should have done that, but I totally don't. So that's my bad. But anyway, the way that the stories sort of go, the first novel, called Xenos, it was published in 2004, and it introduces us to the character Gregory Eisenhorn, who is an Inquisitor for the Imperium, and he's part of Ordo Xenos. And it starts off with him hunting somebody on an ice planet, and it's action filled right in the beginning. But this book series covers his exploits trying to uncover this heretical thing that actually involves the intrusion of chaos and some chaos space marines near the end. And this whole story arc, this 3-book series, follows the story arc where he's following this arch nemesis called Pontius Glau, who's a heretic, and he ends up having to Eisenhorn ends up having to embrace chaos in the process to be able to defeat these guys who are far more powerful than he is, because Space Marines are way more powerful than regular humans, and Chaos Space Marines somewhat, to some extent, are more powerful than regular Space Marines because they've embraced chaos, and chaos is manipulates and destroys everything that it touches, so they're like walking plagues, essentially. So he has to embrace some chaos via a book called the Malus Codicum, which he has, which for whatever reason, and he uses that to defeat them, which gets his companions, which are the characters I mentioned before, mad at him. So that's why Ravenor and Beckwin have their own stories, because they're kind of pissed off with the way the story ends in the Eisenhorn sequence, or the Eisenhorn series, and that's the thing. I'll get more into that in a second. But essentially, the books introduce us to the Warhammer 40k universe relatively easily, because we're following this one character, and we get to find out about the Imperium and about the Inquisition relatively early on in a very simple to explain way, because he's part of Ordo Xenos, and then there are 2 other Ordos, Ordo Hereticus and Ordo Malleus. And Ordo Hereticus is the group of Inquisitors, sorry, I don't know why I couldn't think of the word, who are tasked at hunting down mutants and corrupt tech priests and unregistered, unsanctioned psychers and stuff like that, basically the internal threats to the Imperium of Man. And the Ordo Malleus, which deals directly with chaos and the incursions of chaos in warp space. So we get introduced to all of these pieces, all the Space Marines, rogue traders, planetary governors, imperial guardsmen, warp space, chaos, all of it in one group of stories. So it's really good if you don't know anything about the Warhammer 40k universe. It just kind of gives you what you need to know in a very palatable fashion. But the main story of Eisenhorn is basically one of a guy who eventually gets a little corrupted. He's on the fringe of the universe because his job puts him at the end of the universe where Xenotech is being found and used. And so he ends up like getting on the fringes, and his process of trying to defeat it, he gets labeled a heretic not once but twice in the stories. So it's also this sort of redemption story for this character who goes a little bit too far and then tries to come back. But then has to like decide if he needs to go too far to win. Like, do you fight fire with fire, essentially? But yeah, no, like I said, no spoilers. But he ends up, having to embrace some chaos in the process, which I think we all would if we were like thinking like, what can make us the most powerful to be able to beat things that are most powerful, more powerful than us. The pros and cons of this book series. They're wonderful. It's a wonderful book series, but it does have some cons. So we'll go with pros and cons. Pros about the Eisenhorn, just the trilogy, not the whole series, because I haven't actually read Beckwin, nor have I read most of Ravenor. I think I only started the first book in the Ravenor series. I didn't even get through that one, just because I got busy, not because I didn't like it. Dan Abnett's a pretty good writer. Sometimes he writes really terrible stuff, but most of the time he writes really good stuff. But the Eisenhorn trilogy covers the Warhammer 40k universe in a palatable way, like I said, and introduces us to all of those things, so that's a big pro. Another big pro is that it's a complete story arc. All 3 books together make one complete story about a character, and like the rest of the times he appears in like Ravenor and in Magos is just kind of like ancillary stuff, not necessary to the like story arc that we read before. And then the retinue of other characters that help Eisenhorn is super cool. There's a lot of really cool characters. There's like a tech priest, and there's like this psyker who's like really powerful, and there's blank. Like, these are very cool characters in the series. So all of the characters that he surrounds himself with, like my favorite was the rogue trader guy, who's this rogue trader. He's got this ship with he doesn't have any people on it, so he's like starved for human interaction, and all of his like crew are servitors, which is really crazy because the ship is huge, because all ships in the Warhammer 40k universe are giant. It's like the size of a floating city, and he's got this floating city run by servitors, no human beings. So he's a really interesting character. So like this really, really cool set of characters that help out Eisenhorn. So that's like a pro. The cons of the Eisenhorn series, though, is that it's a little bit disappointing in the end, because it does feel like Dan Abnett sort of fell in love with like Gideon, Ravenor, and Beckwin sort of halfway through the series, and decided he was going to write their own series. So he's like, I'm going to take all these characters, I'm going to write their own stories like off to the side. And because of that, the Eisenhorn series sort of feels like it's like a stepstone to those other stories. It feels like it's like a setup to set these other characters up to have their own stories. So it sort of ends a little bit disappointingly, which is a problem for a lot of people, and the internet is full of people who hate on it because of that. That's like their biggest complaint, is that at the end it sort of feels like it's just a tie-in or a lead-in to other series, which is true. I agree with that. And then the other problem with the series that's like a major con is that there are time jumps, not just inside the books themselves, where there's like a time jump where it's like 3 months have passed between chapters, which is kind of makes sense when there's certain reasons for that, like they're traveling in warp space, so that just like jump ahead because they're just sitting around waiting for the timeline to get out of warp space or whatever. I understand that, but there's like giant time jumps between the books, which is a big problem because we weren't there between the books and we don't know what the hell went on. So all of a sudden there's this giant time jump, and it's been like 50 years since the last book or something, and it's crazy, and it's like, what the heck? And like the ages of the characters don't make sense if you weren't aware of the way that the Warhammer 40k universe handles like the rich people who are able to afford like medical tech to stay alive, or nor if you didn't know that the Warhammer 40k universe is sort of based, like some of it is based off of the Dune series, and Dune had this like idea that if you use spice you would essentially stay younger longer. If that was not information you knew, then you would be really confused about this time jumps, which I was when I read the series. I was like, whoa, what the hell? So I had to like see if I missed something. I went on the internet and had to look around to see if I missed some stuff. But yeah, it was like weird. But so otherwise, I give the story about 1.5 stars, or not stars, 1.5 thumbs. So 1.5, only because, like I said, the ending's a little bit disappointing. Other than that, like it's still a pretty good story, and it's still a pretty good story that introduces you to the Warhammer 40k universe without making it really complicated and hard to understand, because he could have made it way more complicated when he doesn't. He's just like, there are things that are going on in the universe that Eisenhorn has no clue about, and he knows he has no clue about it, and he doesn't care. It's stuff that doesn't involve him, so he's like, okay, I really don't care what's going on over there. I really only care about this. So that really helps out to like focus. You're like, all right, this is the only thing I need to know about. I don't need to know about what's going on over there, or like this new introduction of like Space Marines. I don't need to know anything about that because I don't care, right? Like it's not important to me hunting down some dudes, right? So like it's pretty good. So that's it. I give it 1.5 thumbs, and this video is way more organized than the previous video. So I hope you guys like it, and I will see you later.